Mikkeli muuseumi näitus Zuloaga Hispaania hing toob publiku ette Hispaania olulise maalikunstniku Ignacio Zuloaga loomingu. Hispaania identiteediotsingud 20. sajandil, Hispaania maalikoolkonna mõtestamine on väga sarnane ja paralleelne sellega, mis toimus ka Eestis samal ajal ja mujal Euroopas, mistõttu Zuloaga looming, mis käsitleb hispaanlust, hispaanlaseks olemist, Hispaania kunsti, looduse, inimeste kohta maailmas, seda vaimsust, mis iseloomustab seda maad ja neid inimesi. Tema looming on taas aktualiseerunud just nüüd, 21. sajandi alguses ning seetõttu kunstnik, kes on oma aja ereesindaja, on muutunud ajatuks ja kõnetab oma võimsate emotsionaalsete teostega meid tänapäeval. Mistõttu on ka õigustatud just Ignacio Zuloaga loomingu toomine siia Tallinnasse Mikkeli muuseumisse sel aastal, mil tähistatakse Eesti ja Hispaania diplomaatiliste suhete 100. aastapäeva. See, mis toimus 20. aastatel Hispaanias, Eestis ja mis toimub nüüd, me saame näha neid erinevusi ja ka sarnasusi. Ja miks just Zuloaga on parim saadik Hispaania olemuse hinge selgitamiseks, on see, et ta ühendab endas erinevate piirkondade, Hispaania on ju nii erinev, koosneb erinevate ajalugude, erinevate kultuuriliste traditsioonidega maadest, kuid Zuloaga jaoks olid võrdselt olulised kõik Hispaania osad. Ta on baski päritolu, ta kasvas üles kuulsas kunstnike perekonnas, kes tegelesid metallikunstiga, relvade ja turviste dekoreerimisega, siis õppis ta Prados kuulsate Hispaania suurmeistrite loomingu kopeerides, tudeerides. Siis sõitis Pariisi, kus modernistlik kunst kujundas temast kaasaegse kunstniku, kes valdas tehniliselt kõiki saavutusi, mida kaasaegne kunst pakkus, kuid rakendas neid oma enda eesmärkide teostamiseks. Ja nendes eesmärkideks oli emotsiooni vahendamine ja emotsionaalne vahendamine sellest, milline on tema maa, kust ta pärit on. Mitmeid aastaid töötas ta Andaluusias, Lõuna-Hispaaniast, oli lähedaselt tuttav ja oli sügav asjatundja flamenkost, flamenko muusikud, lauljad, tantsijad. Ta tundis neid, ta elas nende seas, ta oskas rooma keelt, kõik alates laulutraditsioonist kuni rõivaste ja elustiilini oli talle väga tuttav, väga omane ja tema oli oma selles seltskonnas. Ka härjavõitlejad, kuulsad oma aja härjavõitlejad olid tema sõprade hulgas. Siis kolis ta Kastiiliasse, Hispaania keskosasse, kõrbeliselt kuiva mägisesse piirkonda, kus ta soetas enda ateljeeks ja perekonna koduks 14. sajandist pärineva Pedraza kindluse ja tema loomingust kujunes Kastiilia vaimu ja Kastiilia inimeste eepiline kujutus. Teos, millega me tutvustame näitust 4 naist mere ääres, näitab neid ühendusi. Mererannas, mis on selgelt Põhja-Hispaania rannik, tumeda liiva ja tumeda mereveega, kuid siin rannas seisavad daamid Andaluusia kostüümides. Ka daamide näod on erinevad ja siin me räägime mitte ühendamisest, geograafilisest ühendusest, vaid ajalisest. Selgelt on näha naiste nägude päritolu Goya loomingust, seosed Goya loominguga ja Zuloaga oli sügav Goya loomingu asjatundja ja samas teised naised on kujutatud kaasaegses võtmes. Siia rand on eksinud Pariisi viimase moe järgi riietatud daam. Daamal me näeme väikseid figuure, mis on hoopiski Kastiilias pärit, need meeste pikad pruunid mantlid ja suured mustad kübarad, need on karmid Kastiilia mehed. Ehk siis siin on ühendatud kõik nii palju erinevaid tsitaate ja viiteid erinevatele Hispaania osadele, mis kõik moodustavad ühe terviku ja selles on Zuloaga loomingulise meetodi põhitõde on mitte kujutada elu sellise, nagu ta näib. Sellise olukorda ei oleks saanud kunagi juhtuda, vaid see on see, mille kunstnik loob see tõde, mille kunstnik loob. Ja just sellise tõe, sisemise tõe poole pürgimine ja selle emotsionaalne sugestiivne väljendamine on see, mis iseloomustab Zuloagat. Tema jaoks pidi kunst kõnetama publikut, vaatajat ilma selleta, et keegi seletaks seda. Pilt peab rääkima iseenda eest ja kunstnik kasutab oma vahendeid, värvi, joont, kompositsiooni, intellektuaalseid viiteid, emotsionaalseid värvikooslusi selleks, et anda edasi seesama tunne, mida kunstnik tundis ja mis loob oma sügava emotsionaalse teadmise igas vaates.
When Zuloaga arrived in Paris in 1890, last months of 1889 more or less, he came from Rome. He had studied the Spanish masters in the Prado Museum, and he did the normal painter career that other painters did. Sorolla, for example, also studied in Rome. However, Zuloaga was a bit disappointed when he got there. He was looking for something else. He wanted something more modern, more expressive, another kind of language than the academical language that Spain was so fond of during the 19th century. Of course, Spanish tradition had painters such as Goya, but emulating Goya or building a school of painting out of the kind of Goya, Velázquez or Rivera painters, it proved extremely difficult. So they just went for academic art, and they had very good academicians. And Zuloaga was not looking for an academy, he was looking for modernity, he was looking for expression. So he got to Paris, and he quickly got involved in the modern movement. He studied together with Eugène Carrier, with Gervais, and he got in contact, very close contact, with most of the main painters, artists and musicians of the beginning of the 20th century Paris. This first painting that we have here shows that first thoughts of Zuloaga concerning his style. It's very rare to see a Zuloaga that's so bright and so small. But in fact, his first 10 years, he was looking for his own style. And he searched throughout the different perspectives of Parisian art back in the time. As I said, he was very close to most impressionisms. So here he delivers this visit of his father, which is very symbolic in fact. The fact that it's his father, the guy that worked on iron, the famous artist, that is portrayed in this very, very, very impressionist setting, and his sister, just tell us about this idea of Zuloaga of starting to include symbols and the landscapes. However, if we look at this painting, we can see very clearly that it belongs to that very Paris, the Paris to which Zuloaga arrived to. During that first decade in Paris, he developed a great career. When he arrived at Sevilla 4 years later, he started painting Spanish themes. Things started growing, figures started growing, contrast started growing, and expression. He was, of course, in contact with the old masters of Spanish school and pretty obsessed with them. He started collecting Goyas, started collecting Grecos, starting studying the Golden Century. And that change in his painting put him apart from the rest of the creators of that moment. He had very close bonds to Émile Bernard, he had very close bonds to Gauguin, but he chose another path. Instead of looking out of Europe, he chose to look into not only Europe, but his own country, the deepest part of his country. And that was absolutely praised by the press, by the intellectuals, by the artists themselves. In fact, Émile Bernard said once that if he had to rank the artists of Paris back in the time, Zuloaga was the best among them all. One of the other intellectuals with which Zuloaga was very much in contact was Charles Maurice. Of course, he is the father, intellectual father of symbolism. And it's very interesting because Zuloaga, even though you may not see it clearly at first, is a symbolist painter. He was including symbols back in the beginning of his Parisian career, and it's very symbolic, as to say, that he portrays Charles Maurice himself. It is a very interesting painting because even though the date is 1898, we see that he has a very Parisian modern approach to the first portrait. I'm going to talk about this portrait as if there were two portraits, because in fact it's not a whole composition. The first portrait was different. It was Charles Maurice on his own, and then he married. He met his wife and married, and of course his wife wanted to appear in the painting. So eventually Zuloaga changed the whole concept and did two things. First, he painted the wife of Charles Maurice as he had painted Charles Maurice, even though his style had changed already, but he could go back to his former modern pseudo-impressionism style. And the other thing, it was a portrait of half body, a bust, and it cutted it and transformed it so that it had an even more modern look. This is a very, very, very fascinating portrait simply because it's very modern, so you can see up to what point Zuloaga could use that mechanisms of 1900 Paris.
Zuloaga omanäolise stiili kujunemisel on olulise tähtsusega Segoovias veedetud aastat. Segovia, mis asub Kastiilias, oli linn, kuhu Zuloaga sõitis oma onu juurde, Danieli, kellega koos nad jagasid ateljeed, mis asus ilmalikuks hooneks muudetud kirikus 7. sajandist pärinev hoones, kus igal aastal talveperioodideks tulles Zuloaga maalis selle poole aastaga 10 maali, millega ta sõitis Pariisi, esines Pariisi salongis, viis edasi teoseid Münchenisse, Londonisse, New Yorki, Moskvasse, Peterburi, kuhu iganes kõik peamistes Euroopa suurtes linnades toimusid suured Zuloaga väljapanekud, näitused. Tema teoseid oodati, need veensid ja pakkusid uut vaatenurka Hispaaniale. Zuloaga onu perekond oli väga lähedane talle. Ta on kujutanud neid üle 70 korra erinevatel maalidel, kuid kõige enam portreteeris ta kandidat ühte oma onu tütardest. Kandida portreesid on teada ligi 20 ja see siin kandida hiinapärases õlarätis on üks veenvamaid ja võluvamaid. Me näeme väga modernset lähenemist maalile ja dekoratiivselt mõjuvat, kuid samas portreeliselt võluvat kujutist. Neiud, kes on võib-olla meile võõrapäraselt valgeks võõbatud näoga, siin on selline väike tore nüanss, sest proviintsis elanud tütarlapsed nägid oma sugulasse saadetud piltidel Pariisi kaunitare, kes tundusid fotodel väga valgenahalised. Ja siis need sügavalt päevitunud Hispaania tüdrukud tahtsid onupoja ees näha välja peened daamid ja katsid oma nägu valge värviga, valge puudriga, natuke robustselt ja kunstlikult nende arvamuse järgida Pariisi moodi. See tundus Zuloagale nii armas ja tore ja ta meelega jäädvustaski neid siireid, emotsionaalseid inimesi, nende siiras soovis ennast eksponeerida selliste peenete daamidena, kuid samas me tunneme seda kirge, seda sügavat tunnet ja see sall, hiinapärane sall viitab Hispaania impeeriumi minevikule, kui Hispaania impeerium oli nii suur, et kunagi päike ei loojunud seal. Filipiinidelt toodud Hiina õlarätid, siidist käsitsi tikitud. Seesama sall, mida kannab kandida, on siin näitusel. Aeg on olnud armutu pigmentide suhtes ja need on natuke pleekinud, kuid me tunneme ära neid mustreid, me näeme eelkõige inimest ja siis tema ümbrust, sest inimene ja tema hing ongi see eesmärk, mille poole pürgis Zuloaga oma loomingus.
There's something deeply Spanish about Zuloaga's art. It's very difficult to define, but I'd say that it's a constant search of truth and the means to make the public understand this truth about what he's depicting is always expressive, it's always emotional. And it's something that connects him very deeply with the Spanish school. I mean, like El Greco, Goya, they are like two icons of Spanish school, and neither of them were concerned about how real their paintings looked. They were concerned about how they communicated, how deeply they communicated with people. When Zuloaga arrived at Segovia and he found all of that material, all of that truth of that region, not only Segovia but inner Spain, that region that was far away from the evolution that was going on and the revolutions and the civilizations that were going on near the sea, near the ports of Spain, and he found that people there living and believing, and that had been living and believing in the same things for centuries, since the Middle Ages. He really found a lot of material, a lot of truth that he could transmit. And at this moment, that's beginning of the 20th century, last 2 years of the 19th century, Zuloaga started building up these amazing compositions that brought him world fame and for which he was renowned for. When he wanted to explain, to communicate this truth of inner Spain, of virgin inner space, he mostly used the same mechanism as he would use for portraits, but in the other way around, as to say. There are figures and there's a landscape. In this case, there are 3 figures. Those 3 figures are portraits of locals. In fact, we know some of them. Here we have the portrait of the wife of Francisco, which was a model of Zuloaga for most of his most important works. And she was called Casilda. In fact, we know even her name, her story, everything. And Zuloaga loved about both Francisco and Casilda their true, non-civilized, but very beautiful way of life, their silence, and the beauty of their whole philosophy of life. It wasn't bucolic, it wasn't idealistic. Zuloaga realized it was harsh, it was tough, but so was inner Spain. It was a frontier, and frontiers are always very tough. The figures opened themselves and just let us nearly stroll up to this balcony. They are inviting us to come in. This is a kind of thing that is very usual in Spanish painting. There's always someone looking at you from a corner, putting you inside of that painting. In this case, it's Casilda Castilla. And we are looking at one of those historical old villages. The way he paints the village, it's nearly the same as the way he's painting people. It looks as if the whole little medieval town was coming out of the rocks. There's nearly no difference. The colors are similar, everything is similar, and there's a storm. So the things that change, the storm, the weather, the skies are up there, but nearly everything, the horizon, the tall horizon, nearly everything is what doesn't change. There's this beautiful phrase from this philosopher, Spanish philosopher Unamuno, who said, watching the paintings of Zuloaga, I realize how much we still have of that is eternal, and how little of that changes. And this is exactly that. Not only the village is coming out of the rocks, also the people are coming out of the rocks. You see here, of course, there's these greenish, yellowish, beautiful capes that these women are wearing, but they are nearly coming out. They are part of the mountain, they are part of the landscape. Of course, everything was twisted in order to make it work. If we take a look of Sepúlveda, we can go today, it's just like that, it's beautiful, it's still medieval, it's protected, but there are lots of little houses, lots of different things that have changed. They haven't changed, in fact. They are changed comparing to the painting, but they haven't changed. But Zuloaga, if he needed to change something, if he needed to put this house here, or this road there, or whatever, he would do, because everything has to serve the same purpose, and that same purpose is the truth, the symbol, the communicating with emotion, with character, with expression, that very idea. So, what is the secret of the success of Zuloaga? The secret of the success is that he's hitting with the tools of a very old culture, a very old painting school, and he's using them to talk about very ancient concepts, about surviving, about life, about death, about being human, and about humans being part of something, part not of a community, but rather of a land, as if they were part of that land, as the rocks, as the trees, as the houses, as the clouds. By the end of 1915, Zuloaga was perhaps the most famous portraiteur, not only in Europe, but in the whole world. He had delivered some of the most impressive portraits of both intellectual personalities, artists, high society throughout the last 10 to 15 years, more or less. And throughout this time, he had developed what was the Zuloaga canon, the Zuloaga language, his own mechanism as to make portraits work. This mechanism consisted basically in not only using the image of the person that you are portraying, but rather the landscape, the surroundings, the objects that are around that person to talk about himself. And not only to relate him to a certain land or to a certain feat or to a certain, but rather to relate them to their doing. When we get to personality portraits and we are looking at personality portraits of his friends, we talk about some of his masterpieces, that's for sure. Here we have a very special case. Juan Belmonte was a great friend of Zuloaga. He was one of the great bullfighters in history of bullfighting. In fact, he changed history of bullfighting. He was an intellectual. And there's something about the art and the craft of Juan Belmonte that is very difficult to explain and that Zuloaga makes us understand with all the elements that he put into his portrait. Juan Belmonte changed bullfighting by standing still. It may sound silly, but before Juan Belmonte, bullfighters ran a lot. They ran for their lives. And even though all bullfighters showed lots of courage, Belmonte thought, well, it's not about courage because the bull can kill you, it's about courage against the fear that death is close. Of course, bullfighting, for Zuloaga, he was a good bullfighter and he knew bullfighting, he was very passionate. And for Belmonte as well, and for all great bullfighters, it was a right. It was something close to religion. And that's why there's a whole philosophy of someone getting in front of a 600-kilogram animal that can kill you in no time. So Belmonte's attitude, philosophy is, it was always about we fight our own fears. We fight ourselves. We subdue ourselves. And that's something that Zuloaga portrayed beautifully. Of course, here is the lonely hero, but the portrait is not very heroic. In fact, it's a bit gloomy. Why? Because it's not a real scene that he's painting. It's what is on Belmonte's mind. It's his philosophy that he's painting. And he doesn't have to paint the bull, the thread. He can just put all these symbols into work. The stormy sky, it's amazing. And the whole pose of the bullfighter in front of the storm, but not only that, the village, this is Segovia, it's a village, it's in the region of Segovia, it's in Ayllón, it's a little village close to Segovia, and you see the ring here. And people are not dressed in colorful clothes or festive garments. They are just sitting there, most of them wearing black. the little portrait, the little landscape here, it's an abstract piece nearly on its own. And here, there is the black door. Through that black door, we are going to be seeing come out a bull. And the bull is a symbol of greatness. For Spanish culture, it's a symbol of death, and it's a symbol of courage. So this whole idea that you have in the corner is working together with the expression of the bullfighter. Of course, in the best tradition of Spanish portraying, which are not like beautiful portraits, they don't make you look nice, they just tell how you feel, how you are. What is your soul like? And so Zuloaga puts in here so many elements to tell us this. Of course, if you see this portrait, we understand clearly that the light is not natural. It is in fact like a theater light. It's so clearly lit, the whole figure. You almost see the glitter on the bullfighter costume. And behind him, all this scenery. And this scenery is just the idea of a man facing his own fears.
Kuigi põhiosa Ignacio Zuloaga loomingus moodustavad portreed, on ta maalinud mitmeid väga võimsaid maastikke. Ja maastikumaalid olid ka tema jaoks eriline žanr. Ta rääkis, et maastikumaalid on justkui tema autoportreed, tema enda sisemise olemuse, sisemiste tunnete kujutised. Maastik ei ole lihtsalt looduse kujutus Zuloaga jaoks. Nagu ka portreedes taotleb ta maastikes üldist muljet, sümboolsuse, tõed väljatoomist. Alcázar, Segovia võimas kindlus, üks 4 kõige olulisemast kuninglikust Alcázarist, muistne, võimas hoone, mis asub mäenõlval ja on kujutatud väga tuntud paigast, ehk siis sellise nurga alt me näeme ka Segovia kindlust tänapäeva postkaartidel. Maastikumaal, mis sai tehtud kunstnikul valmistada ette Blanche Barrymori portreed, mille visand on ka samuti siin näitusel, jäi seisma tal ateljees ning ligi 15 aastat hiljem tuli ta selle juurde tagasi ning lõi dramaatilise taeva ja maastiku mäe jalamil, mis on võimsalt emotsionaalne, ekspressiivne. Lähedalt vaadates seda maalipinda meenutab abstraktset ekspressionismi, kus kunstniku tunne on värvides, värvikobarates, läbi kriimustatud reljeefides tunda. Tormine taevas ja ideaalselt õrna päikesega valgustatud Alcázar on tugevas kontrastis omavahel ja selliseid teatraalseid efekte taotles Zuloaga ka oma portreedes, nii nagu ka selles maastikumaalis, kus peategelane ja teda ümbritsev loodus on sügavalt, kui mitte vastuolus, kuid täiendavad ennast oma iseloomult, sest elu ja tormilisus väljendub selles taevas, kus me näeme ka lihtsalt briljantset maalimisvõtteid ja rahulik, stabiilne, kaunis Alcázar räägib ajaloo püsivusest.
This is a portrait of Maria Rosa Suárez, the granddaughter of Ignacio Zuloaga. She inherited from him the strength, the passion, and the love for authentic things. Maria Rosa is the person that made this exhibition possible. Unfortunately, Maria Rosa passed away 3 weeks ago. That's why I think it's very important to have her with us today, because her last dream was to be in Tallinn today with us, and she is.